having the humility to listen to another point of view. Maybe not adopt everything, but maybe take from it what you need to take from it. As uncomfortable as it may be, as anxiety-ridden as it may lead to, it's something that it's imperative.
The Industrial Growth Institute podcast connects you with the big thinkers, makers, and subject matter experts across all aspects of an integrated B2B industrial revenue growth function. From strategy, board oversight, and transactions, through all the phases of manufacturing marketing, the complexities of industrial sales, and the nuances of marketing and sales technology and customer experience, I speak with guests who bring insights, innovative perspectives, best practices, and twists on traditional approaches. Each episode explores high-level thinking and in-the-weeds actionable tactics. If you enjoyed these discussions, then please help me out by liking and sharing the podcast, and especially by leaving a comment and giving a review. So with no further ado, let's jump into this episode. I'm Ed Marsh, and I'm thrilled to welcome you to this episode of the Industrial Growth Institute podcast. My goal in this podcast is to challenge traditional thinking around middle market industrial manufacturing and revenue growth. So that means strategy and board governance and marketing and sales and customer experience and technology that pervades all of those. But it also means attitudes and mindsets. And that can be really tough, particularly in Gen 2 and Gen 3 companies, which have grown successfully for years and create comfortable lifestyles for a number of family members. There's an understandable but very strong risk aversion. And the attitude is, why change if it's not broken? And rising generations are torn between awareness of the changes in the market and an obligation to preserve this legacy. And machine shops are a great example of this. Many companies have sold out in recent years as private equity has rolled out many shops, but others remain stubbornly independent. And so it creates an interesting case study because technology has evolved so much for how these companies do business, from mill and lathe to fully computerized machining centers in just a couple decades. But at the same time, many still market and sell the same way. I mean, their websites typically talk about the number of years in business, the size of the facility, the machinery they use, and sales teams really just kind of spit out quotes and emphasize lead time and quality as though that's somehow unique. So today's guest is going to help us peel back the layers of the onion from a couple different perspectives. I'm really excited to chat with Dan Ott, who's the creative content manager for the NTMA, the National Tooling and Machining Association. That's the trade association and advocacy group for machine shops. I've been wanting to interview Dan since a fascinating conversation that we had back in October of 2023. We've had several since then, and so here we are. And rather than run through a more detailed bio, we're going to jump in because I think his bio is really part of the conversation. You'll definitely, as you listen to this, you're going to want to share this episode with others on your team across functions and up and down through seniority. This should be, I think, really fascinating. Welcome, Dan. Thank you for joining me today.
Thank you for having me, Ed. I'm happy to be here.
Yeah, my pleasure. I'm excited about this. I've been looking forward to it and kind of getting excited about where I think this conversation is going to go. So let's just start with, I mean, I know from conversation that you're a gentle and patient person, and we're going to talk about how that plays out in your conversations with senior executives. But let's start with something different. Let's start with middle school football. You coached it for years. And I know from my years coaching middle school lacrosse players, that takes some serious patience. So originally, I guess you were going to be an elementary school teacher and you were playing college ball. You give us the 3-minute version of your ESPN 30 for 30 so we kind of know who Dan is.
My 30 for 30. No, so I grew up playing sports just like a lot of other kids, and really gravitated towards football because honestly, my body type really lend itself to the football body. And, it's something that I just grew to love, and, played all through high school, played into college. And, the original plan, just like a lot of kids' original plans, kind of go awry sometimes. And like a lot of other kids in the country, our parents try to do as much as they can for us while we're going through these times. And my parents were not unlike the rest of them and tried to, make as much money to kind of offset the cost of college for me. And it ended up kind of having a backfiring effect. And one of the things that I had to do was kind of weigh at the end of my couple of years in college whether or not I wanted to keep going and endure or incur $15,000 to $17,000 a year in tuition and have all of these bills to pay once I finish and graduate, or, I can make the logical move and move home, kind of commute to the local, state school in the area and save myself some money. So yeah, my original plan was to be an elementary school teacher and kind of go into coaching, and that didn't go as I planned. And fortunately for me, I had a family member who worked in the CNC machining field. She had been a customer service representative and then worked her way up through the ranks at a local company called Kyocera SGS. And in 2006, I was kind of lost looking for an avenue, and got an email from her saying, you should probably apply for this job that we had for the coding company. I applied. Maybe I don't think it was more than a week before I'd had the job. And I was there from 2006 until 2017. I worked my way up from being a delivery driver all the way to being a coding technician, which is the one of the senior positions you can have while on the floor. Just went through.
So you come at all this. You come at this with really a deep and abiding understanding of what goes on the floor of a shop.
Yes.
And I think it's interesting to hear you talk about that choice that you made in 2007. We now see articles written about it and people talking publicly about making a conscious decision between incurring a bunch of debt and getting a liberal arts degree versus going into a trade. And I think there's much more acceptance for going into the trade today than there was maybe, 15 years ago or 20 years ago when you're talking about.
Well, and, so that's part of, the message that we're trying to convey to a lot of these kids in high school who, and by no fault of their parents, have been given the message that you go to college, you get a 4-year degree, you get a good job. But that isn't necessarily the game plan. That isn't necessarily the model that needs to be followed anymore. Right. A lot of these kids don't realize that, going into a trade like CNC machining, you could get a job right out of high school that's paying you a living wage, a good living wage. And a lot of these schools will pay for your education, whether that's a journeyman card or whether that's going back to school to become a master machinist. And once you've achieved those things, if you even wanted to, if you worked for a certain company, you could take advantage of a tuition waiver program that they might have. Where they reimburse you for the tuition. You can you're continuing to earn a living wage, and you're going back to school to get a degree whilst not incurring any debt.
And we're going to talk about how you did that going to Kent State. But the other thing that I think you are a living example of is that just because you start in the trades doesn't mean that you have to stay in the trades. It's a wonderful career, great livelihood. People support families and build wonderful businesses. But sometimes somebody does it, learns a lot, experiences it, glad they did it, and then they're ready to do something different. And that's what you did. I think after a decade, you jumped from the production floor to the air-conditioned office. You went from machining into stepping into a marketing coordinator role. Mm-hmm. And then I gather it sounds like you're speaking from experience. You spent 5 years getting your degree in marketing from Kent State while you were still on the floor. So we've been talking abstractly about what some companies can do, but tell me more about how you made that transition.
So I met my wife in 2011, and she worked for the local college here in one of their schools, and kind of put my feet to the fire because I had been talking about going back to school for a number of years, and really kind of looked at me and was just like, "It's put up or shut up, buddy. Like you can continue to tell people you're going back and have them wonder if it's ever going to come to fruition, or you can actually go." And, so like you said, I had been on the floor for the better part of a decade. And she looked at me and she was like, "Is this really what you want to do forever? Or is this something you want to transition to, like another career?" And I had always been interested in marketing and being creative. And one of the things that, she kind of, did some research for me, told me marketing might be in my alley. And fortunately for me, I was able to take advantage of tuition waivers. And again, fortunately for me, I had a company that was willing to work with me on the hours that would facilitate me being able to go back to school. And it's not for the faint of heart. I don't recommend it for everybody because there were nights where, I'm up till midnight, 1 a.m. and having to get up the next morning and go back to work. And, it was a challenge, but it is something that, has provided me a invaluable experience when it comes to, actually what I do for a living now. So.
And a great story about the value of a strong relationship and strong marriage, that kind of support and encouragement and nudging and accountability with a partner can be really valuable too. So after about 5 years at Kyocera, or after 5 years of marketing at Kyocera, you switched over to NTMA.
Yeah.
And we met through the NTMA, which I've been associated with for some years. I gave a keynote at an annual meeting of the LA chapter, I think back in, that must have been 2016. And since the beginning of 2023, I've been writing a monthly column for the print magazine. But how did you land there? How did you find out about it? I don't think they had that role when you went there. How did you make that transition, and how did they welcome you in?
So, I've been at Kyocera for 16 years, and there was some issues that I had that just ended up leading to me looking, that kind of opened my eyes. Maybe this isn't the end of the road. Maybe that's not, I'm a lifer here. Maybe it's something that I should look to see what else the world has. And came across a listing for the creative content manager job with NTMA, and really was glued to their story because it felt like my story in a lot of ways. Where they offer a non-traditional way and path for college, or not for just college, but to, for a career for a lot of these young people. And that really gravitated towards me because that was something that I think if I had been exposed to, I might have been able to take advantage of it and maybe have gone down this path a little earlier. But yeah, so it was just serendipitous that I found the listing for the position, and they really liked my story, and we just ended up gravitating towards each other and made the transition last March.
So obviously NTMA had a magazine. They'd had various other typical trade association kind of content, but I don't think I've seen a job title like yours in many associations as a creative content manager. Do you know where that vision came from within NTMA? Was it driven by the board or leadership?
I think it was determined by leadership that there was times were changing a little bit, and the traditional way with the go-to-market strategy had changed. And it was no longer the status quo. It's kind of like you said earlier. It's like they were abiding by if it ain't broke, but it's not necessarily. It can't be. It's not something that can't be improved.
Right.
And I think they realized that, and just kind of put together a plan to kind of market to the next generation. Because like a lot of these shops who were dealing with first, second, and third generation, transitions of succession planning. You go to a younger audience, and there's a different message that needs to be conveyed to all these different audiences. So I think it was apparent to them that, something like my position was no longer a nice to have, but more of a need to have.
But NTMA, of course, has to market to the potential members that have those generational transitions, but also they have to provide education and model kind of a better example for those companies to market to their buyers. And so you guys are explaining marketing and demonstrating marketing on a couple different levels.
Right. It's an interesting position because, not only am I marketing towards NTMA, but when I get in front of a lot of these member companies, they'll take advantage of my knowledge, and they'll tend to say, what are we doing at NTMA that they can maybe mirror? What are we doing what technologies are we taking advantage of that maybe they could take advantage of? An example being, I spoke a little bit with a lot of the members at our last year's, fall conference in Indianapolis. And one of the things that we brought up was the addition of something like ChatGPT. A lot of these small to medium-sized manufacturers, they have to come up with job descriptions. They have to come up with work instructions. They have to come up with a lot of different things. And because their time and their attention is split amongst people on the floor and different jobs and here and there, they don't necessarily, it's not that they don't want to have time, but it's just that it's not something that is in the front of their mind. Right. So having something like ChatGPT where I can put in a prompt and very broad brushstrokes kind of instructions, have it spit out for me something that, like I said, is broad brushstrokes kind of work instructions or a job description. And then I can just go about maybe tweaking it here, adjusting it here, and not have to go through the rigmarole and the kind of daunting task of taking it from,
blank
document
sheet
creation to document completion.
Right. Interesting. So you're touching on this perspective you bring, and obviously you've got the educational background and now a number of years of marketing experience with industrial manufacturers. In my experience, companies tend to focus on themselves and their products and their process. How would you describe effective industrial marketing?
That's an interesting question.
Or tell us what it looks like.
So effective industrial marketing, honestly, it's making sure that what your customers are looking for is being delivered at the end of the day. We hit on it a little bit. It's, with the changing of the guard and this older generation kind of looking towards succession planning and being able to retire and passing it down. I think one of the things that we as marketers need to take advantage of, and it really got brought to my attention last year at our manufacturing conference in Indianapolis, is the idea is still the same. At its core, it's building relationships. So my job as a marketer is to help the sales staff or help the technology build a relationship with the customer. Now, that might look different. It's no longer, I'm cold calling. It's no longer I'm, taking a visit to this shop and this shop and this shop. It looks different, but it looks different, but the message is still the same. Mm-hmm. The vehicles change. The models of the vehicles have changed, but the message is still the same. You're still building a relationship. It's just, you're not doing it in the same fashion as you were 10, 15, 20 years ago.
And would you say it's fair that if you're using the term relationship, and I'm wondering if we could substitute for relationship something like a conversation and trust. Is that fair? Okay. All right.
Go ahead.
So what's the role of content then? If the goal of industrial marketing is create relationships, foster conversations, establish trust, then what's the role of content? How does that fit into it?
So I view content as more as a foot of a foot in the door. So content leads to a conversation.
Okay.
Content leads to, which leads to trust. Content leads to, it's putting your best foot forward. So the content that I put out needs to be accurate, needs to be engaging in order to facilitate those conversations down the road.
And we throw around this term content. It's in your job title. We talk about content as though we know what it is and everyone else knows what it is. But let's back up and let's even kind of challenge that a little bit. What is content? How would you answer that question?
Content it's a fancy word for communication.
Okay.
So when I think in my job, the content and my communication message is delivered through a number of vehicles. It's delivered through the, website content. It's delivered through keyword usage. It's delivered through social media. It's delivered through a lot of different vehicles. So I create content, but really what I'm creating is just communications. Mm-hmm. It's not any more or less fancy than creating a colorful message to give at the base level.
And going back to the way you answered the question, what is industrial marketing? You started that by saying getting the buyers what they need and want. And so content has to be focused on the buyers, the questions they're asking, the problems they have, the information they're looking for, the outcomes that they're searching for. Right. And so often companies start assuming the foundation for content is to talk about themselves.
It's interesting. Each company is unique, and I think one of the things that I've kind of learned over my years in industrial marketing is you kind of have to put your own self aside a lot.
Yep.
So one of the things that I've noticed is everybody wants to think in terms of me and I, and it's not necessarily that case. Sometimes you need to think about like the company on the whole, and so. one of the things that I was introduced to is there was an individual in a conversation that we had last year, where he was talking about what he had, his experiences in marketing and how he absorbs information. And they were very, very rigid in how he took in everything. He was, absurdly rigid in his stance on how he wanted to go to market and how he wanted to do business. And really it divided the room in half. There was the half of the room that were open to accepting new technologies, and the other half of the room wanted to do things very old school. Mm-hmm. But the message is still the same. And I think one of the things that people kind of need to embrace is the idea of being humble and having a little bit of humility.
Yeah, and we're going to jump into generational differences in a second, but I want to come back to one thing, a thread through a couple of these exchanges we've had. When we talk about the audience and buyers, you mentioned earlier that part of what NTMA does is helps to market the value of a trade career to help encourage people to come in to work in machine shops. And so that means your audience is teachers. It means it's college counselors. It means it's parents, in addition to students. And if all you do is talk about why we're a good company to work for and the shop floors are clean and it's well lit and it's air conditioned and we provide a 401k, you miss speaking to that audience. And if we could just take that simple example and think of it in the context of our potential buyers of our products, maybe that helps put it in context. Do you find companies, once you explain it that way, do they understand it or do they still struggle?
They still struggle a little bit. Well, like I said, everyone's unique. And I think the way that they adopt a lot of these new practices is met with a little bit of rigidity. But a lot of these conversations that we have, they are open to it, but they want to make sure that you're like me as the person selling this new ideology is trustworthy and that it's in their best interest.
Right. All right, so let's talk about some of these generational differences. We've talked about G1, G2, G3, G4 businesses. I often hear leaders in industrial manufacturing firms say things, and this sounds like a joke, but I'm serious. Our industry is different. Our buyers don't use the internet. Or we're not using chatbots. I've never used one. Our industry is different. And I know that a large part of what you're doing is helping to bridge those generational perspectives. So whether we're talking mobile devices or types of content or video, there's a lot of different angles to this. Just ramble about that for a few minutes.
Yeah. So I think, honestly, when it comes to the generational differences, again, I think technology is a big intimidator. I think for the older generation, like my parents' generation, they did not grow up with this level of technology. So it's all very intimidating on how fast it moves and how fast it evolves. I get this speech all the time. It's like, by the time I get a hold of this version of this piece of technology and I get it in the door, there's 4 more versions of it. And I have to learn this. I have to learn this. So it's all very intimidating that, because technology didn't evolve as quickly as it evolves now. So you got to have time to get used to a certain technology, 10, 15, 20, 30 years ago. Whereas now, if you're not constantly evolving, it's intimidating. Mm-hmm. So I think, it's part of it is when I try to sell, a new process or a new way of doing things, I have to sell how easy it is to navigate and how user-friendly it can be. I don't think a lot of times, and for my generation, we tend to think of things very simplistically, like, oh, this is super easy. It's not that complicated. You'll get it in 5 minutes. It might be for me because I've grown up with this kind of technology and it is all very familiar to me. So the idea that something is easy for me would be universally easy for other generations is not necessarily the case.
Right.
You have to put yourself in the shoes of somebody who hasn't grown up with this. And you have to put 10, 15 years ago, we thought in terms of click rates. If I go to a website, I want to minimize the amount of clicks between this and this. exactly take advantage of that school of thought. I try to think of things as like, if I were my father and I were to go to a website, if I think for 1 second that I'm going to lose track of where I'm going, or I'm not going to find my destination, I'm out of there, regardless of how many times I had to click. If I know where I'm going, doesn't matter how long it takes me to get there. If I have confidence that I'll get there, I'll get there. That's what we kind of have to learn as marketers, is like making sure that there's not that the user doesn't lose sight of the goal at any point in time.
And that we help them understand what their goals maybe should be, because oftentimes people sell themselves short. They self-diagnose with a limited understanding. And part of our job is to help them reframe the way they think about their problems.
Right.
So there's all of this chitter chatter about how everything, attention spans like goldfish, and everything's got to be 3 bullet points and no more than 15 seconds. I'm not sure I buy that. And I want to talk about passive content consumption. And
Sure.
by that, I mean, there's a difference, I think, between getting the information when you need it, interrupting everything else and saying, I'm going to go find an answer to this, versus proactively accumulating information so that you have it when you need it. And my theory is this, that executives used to accept cold calls and meetings because that's how they would learn about new ideas. Reps would come in and throw ideas at them, and that's the way they would accumulate information. Now, as a rule, they don't. And maybe that's because the quality of salespeople has declined. Maybe it's because they're too busy with email. Maybe it's because they are arrogant and think they know everything they need to run a routine operation, whatever the reason. But when they have a problem, they search for answers. They find links to articles, to YouTube videos, etc. But in contrast, I think rising generations maybe try to just accumulate information by consuming content passively. And, podcasts could be an example of that. So they just absorb information while they're commuting or exercising or cooking dinner or whatever, as opposed to going and routinely reading a newsletter. How do you react to that?
I don't know how I react to that. So I think a couple of, things that you point out, I've seen in generations new and old, honestly. You mentioned, the cold calling, being something, a form of a dinosaur. It's, me as a consumer now, I do a lot of the job as a consumer of a salesperson up front.
Mm-hmm.
You don't need to have these introductory conversations with me. I've done a lot of that research on my own. An example I always give is, if I have a clogged sink drain, I always use this as an example. So if I have a clogged sink drain, I Google, I get on my phone and I look up, clogged sink drain, I'm in need of a plumber. All of those top 10 people that I get listed, they all do the job. Then it's on me as a consumer. I then go into each of those and I find out where the differentiation, comes into play. Is it price? Is it location? Is it, their customer? So I go down the rabbit holes of each of these, and I do a lot of this work of a salesman up front. Right. So when I call, a Wilson Plumbing or a Roto-Rooter or whatever it may be, I've done a lot of that work up front. You don't need to sell me anymore. I'm in the door. I know what I'm looking at. I know what you're offering. I know how, the benefits of going with that person. So it comes in the door. They don't really have to do all that job up front. Their job then becomes not creating work up front, but creating a lasting relationship. Mm-hmm. So I've done the introduction. I've done the work of, the introductory sales call up front. And then when they come in and they do the job, if they do the job correctly and they give me wonderful service, I'm there for forever. They don't need to do any more prospecting at all. Right. I'm there. That's how the relationship gets built. So it's not necessarily, like I said earlier, it's not necessarily, the relationship building is still there. It's just the vehicle that was used to distribute the message has changed. So
relationships are a really interesting question. It's one that we've talked about a couple of times, particularly the difference between maybe boomers and Gen X and their good at cultivating long-term relationships, but maybe they struggle to create them today in a virtual world. Whereas in contrast, millennials and Gen Z can establish contact virtually, but struggle to maybe build an in-person enduring relationship. And, we can blame it on online work or COVID changing behaviors or online dating or whatever. But I know you've spent a lot of time thinking and talking about that. Tell me more about it.
That is probably the most important thing that I do in industrial marketing. And it is not something that I've even mastered how to do. I mentioned we had a roundtable discussion. It was sales and marketing related. And like I said, the room was divided in half. Not one half was willing to give the other an inch. In all honesty.
And help me understand how it was divided. Was it by age or was it something else?
Yeah, it really was.
Okay.
It really was. It was divided by, there was a generational gap. Okay. And one side being, pointing at the other side, and he was like, you guys don't know how to establish relationships. All you do is know how to establish content. And the other side being like, you guys don't know how to establish content. I don't need to establish a relationship. My content is my relationship. And it's like, there's a medium place here that I think we all need to get to. And I think, like I mentioned earlier, having that humility and having that humbleness to look at that other generation and realize they've been through this. They know how to do this. There's a lot that I can learn from them.
But if we go back to that substitution of words, stop talking relationships and talk conversations and trust, then, it used to be that would happen at Rotary meetings or at trade association meetings or at bowling league or whatever the case may be. And that doesn't happen now, or at least not as much. And so
not as much. And I don't like, I think it does happen, but I don't think it happens as frequently. And
so how do we change it?
They know how to establish trust.
So how do we overcome it?
I think, honestly, it's taking a step back and realizing that there is something to be learned from the other side and kind of getting down to the root of what it takes to build trust. So like I said earlier, with my plumber example, the trust comes after I've done the work of finding you. Mm-hmm. So to give you another example, I recently had some work done to my car. And one of the things that they did was there was a number of things that I needed to have done. They charged me and I did some introductory, some discovery work, and I found the place that I wanted to take it to. They gave me the rundown of what I needed to have done. And there were 3 issues that I needed to have done. Took about a week. They were very sympathetic to my story. I had to, get a rental car because my wife and I needed to have some sort of form of transportation. We got through it. And when the whole, the job had been done, I looked at the car, I've inspected it, I checked out everything that needed to check out. They looked at me and they're like, look, we cannot be more sympathetic to your story. We charged you for this and this. We're giving you this at no cost. Like, this is like, listen, we've made our profits off of these 2 jobs. This one, I'm not going to hammer you for this one. Thus, they've established a trusting relationship with me. I now feel like I can trust those people to handle things when they come up. Mm-hmm. I had a point of anxiety. I had a point of, not a meltdown, but I had a moment where I felt like I didn't have control. Right. And they helped me have control. They put that fear and made me feel a little better about what was happening. So I did the work of discovery up front. They did a lot of the back end work of establishing that trust later. And now there's no one I'm taking my car to in the future, period. They've established that relationship. I trust them to do the job. And now they have a working, trusting relationship with the customer.
And in complex B2B sales, there's so much uncertainty and risk aversion. If you're buying $1 million machining center, it's different than, the magnitude of the investment may be similar to your spending on repairing a car, but it's going to have a long lead time. It's going to come in. It's going to disrupt production when it gets installed on the floor. It's going to require new training, and nobody wants to make a mistake with that. And so trying to establish trust when there's no opportunity to kind of build it incrementally along the way is a big sales challenge. How do you think marketing helps fill in for that?
So that's an interesting question. You ask me that again, Ed. Just I really want to wrap my mind around that.
Yeah, sure. So if I'm making a big investment that's going to take a year of after I make the decision before it gets installed, it's going to be very disruptive. My reputation is on the line with the people in my company that, yes, he made the right decision. He picked the right machining center, for instance, to come in. At the end of the day, I'm taking a huge leap of faith. I'm taking a leap of faith that the company can deliver. I'm taking a leap of faith the salesperson is telling me the truth. And marketing has to play a role in progressively building trust so that somebody's willing to take that leap of faith and overcome the risk aversion and the uncertainty. So that's a progressive process.
You know, so in my previous life as you know, marketing, you know, the solid carbide tools, it's often that, you know, our sales staff needed to have access to different trainings, whether that's training on a different machine like a Haas or a Makino or a DMG Mori. Because a lot of these different machine shops, they have different technologies and they need to know, not only that, they need to know the software. So having access to a salesperson that can offer, support at any time, they can offer education at any time, and then following up with them to make sure that not only it doesn't just end at, you know, that machine is installed and they're in their shop and it's just they're given the keys and they're just saying, you know, you bid adieu, and then that relationship's over until the next call. It's offering training. It's offering, one thing that we did for in my previous life was we sold through distribution, and we brought in distributors to give them machining training on how to sell the product. So when, you know, Daryl's machine in Akron, Ohio needs to buy an end mill and they're looking for something to machine, you know, 718 Inconel, I needed to run lights out on this, and this. They need to know how to run it. They need to know that they have access to problem solving. They need to know that they have access to troubleshooting. They need that. It's like if they run into a problem where, you know, we're breaking end mills because we're running it at this speed and this speed. You know, I want to be able to call you. I want to be able to say, you know, what is it I'm doing wrong here? What am I doing that I shouldn't be doing? What is it that I should be doing that I'm not doing? And, you know, so you're building a relationship and you're building trust so that not only, when I have this thing in the door that I have a good product, but that I have access to training. I have access to a number of different people that can help me along the way. So I have access to an R&D department. I have access to this, and this. It's not just you have access to the product. You have access to a number of experts in the field that can educate me on how I can better my knowledge of what's going on.
Two things jump out at me about that. Number one, it's about their business and their outcomes, not the products. And you're talking about expertise and insights well beyond the product. And that goes back to what we talked about earlier. The second thing that jumps out at me is, in essence, all of that stuff you're talking about is content. In some cases, it's content that's trapped in the brain of a subject matter expert that gets shared during a phone call. But companies can extract that and make it part of a knowledge base, make it part of an online course, make it part of training that they offer or subscription programs to allow new employees to go through orientation or whatever the case may be. So content isn't just blog articles. And people, I think, have this constraint that they think that content is written material that goes on the website.
So I think everybody, when they think of content, look at it in two ways. They look at it as like ads on a website. They look at it as, publications, brochures. They look at things like, something they can physically and tangibly have in their hands. Content is, so I'll give you an example. In my previous life, we had a program that helped manufacturers use the technology, use the tools that we were marketing to them. It was a computer program that we had them plug in. I want to make a 1/2-inch slot cut in, aluminum. I need it to be, I'm running a machine that has a max RPM of this, hit I wanted to have this kind of a step over. I wanted to have this, and this, and I hit export. And it gives me a sheet of, not only which tool they recommend for that job, but how to run that tool. It gives a list of, if I were to list where the salesman lived in that particular area, it gives you their contact information. So not only do I now have which tool they recommend, I have a list of speed and feed recommendations and how to run the tool, how much, what the surface feet per minute is, what the inches per minute is, and outline how to run that tool as efficiently as possible. But I also give you access to a sales guy in that area that might, if I tell them, I'd like to be able to up the speed a little bit more, and they can give you the bit of a fine tuning. It's like, you probably could up it a little bit. This is more of a safe recommendation here. Why don't I schedule some time to come in? We can workshop it together. And I offer, so that piece of content, that website, that program that I import leads to a conversation which then can build trust.
Yeah, so it's just fostering trust throughout that relationship. And content is available for people to consume in the middle of third shift when they need it, when they have the problem, when they have time to do their research, and combining that, helping bridge the digital with the in-person. I mean, that's so critical. And you just described a great example of doing that. What's interesting, I think, about machine shops is that we've got these very traditional firms that line up on one side of the room that you described that struggle to see an alternative perspective. But then we got some great examples, and I'm not endorsing this as necessarily accurate content, but I can't think of the name of it. Who's the guy that has this amazing YouTube channel that talks about machining all the time?
Are you talking about Titan?
Exactly. I mean, what a phenomenal example of how people can take media and a topic that many would think is boring and actually build an amazing content engine around it.
Yeah. So Titan does a very good job of bridging the two personality types that I see specifically in machining. So Titan, in my previous life, you have the salespeople who are they're very loquacious. They're very well versed in how to speak to people. They're very they're very peppy personalities. And then you have the R&D. They're very introverted. They're not salespeople. They tend to do, they're conversing at a very, very minimalistic basis. If it doesn't need to be said, they're not saying it. Titan does a very, very good job of speaking both languages. He does a very good job, and he's very charismatic about taking the nuts and bolts of the R&D personality and putting it in terms easy enough to understand and with enough personality to kind of draw you in, to give you, to bridge those gaps. He does a phenomenal job.
And he's helped make machining sexy. And when we talk about reaching parents to encourage their kids to go into that kind of a career, I mean, that's the kind of content that's necessary.
Exactly. No, he does a wonderful job of bridging the two generations. Honestly, is like you said, he makes it sexy. He makes it enticing. Right. He makes it something that not only is like, well, I could go down that machining path, but maybe I should. Maybe this isn't just a fallback. Maybe this isn't just in case this happens. Maybe this is plan A and not plan B.
Maybe I could be a TikTok influencer in machine centers.
Yeah. It's funny you mentioned that. So there are a number of different, accounts that I follow, and, I follow, an account called CNC Fails, where they just show an end, like somebody not taking the proper steps and, seeing what happens as a catastrophic error. Or it can be as simple as, a lot of people are manufacturing kind of, to have to play, I'm going to pull up my own heartstrings, but nerd culture. They manufacture a Star Wars helmet and show the capabilities of how intricate the machining process can be, that can manufacture some of these things that I've grown up idolizing. Or it's as amazing as when you see two pieces of metal fit together, and when they're finally pressed together, the seam is gone. It's no longer, just I manufacture this widget that goes here, and here, and here. They are like some of these accounts that, if you follow online, do make CNC work enticing, do make it, like you said, sexy. It looks it looks something that I would want to do and have fun doing.
So just because somebody thinks it's a boring or dirty industry doesn't mean it is. I mean,
no, and that could not be a bigger misconception. That, machining is this, oily drip shops where you walk in and there's a mist that hits you and you're gonna have to take 2 showers when you get home, and it's no longer that kind of environment. It really isn't. We had a chance last year to kind of tour a shop in Indianapolis. I'll give them a shout out. Major Tool. They are absolutely massive organization and could not have been cleaner on the floor from start to finish. They were in a prime example of how a shop should be run and how a lot of shops are run. And a
lot of those are now opening up for manufacturing day events as well, to let parents and school classes come in and experience what manufacturing really is.
Yeah, and it's like, how better to kind of show a parent that your kids are in good hands than to open the doors and let them see it for themselves. That was something that, going back to my start in manufacturing, one of the things that I did before taking my job in 2006 was I took a tour of I think it was maybe 4 or 5 buildings. And, growing up, hearing my family member that kind of got me in the industry tell me about what she did for a living, I had this massive misconception of what her environment was. And coming in and seeing that it wasn't this gross, grimy, nasty, mechanic, I have grease stains all over my pants. I have this, that, and the next. But it was very clean. You could eat off the floors, and they'd taken a lot of time to kind of invest in making sure that it was that way. But that was a big selling point for me, and to make that decision, because I'll be honest with you, when I got pitched the idea of working in the machining industry, I was a little averse. I really didn't look at it as something I wanted to do. It was something that I had to do because I had, there were points in my education that led me to this point. Like, I have to have a job. I have to make a living. But it wasn't something that I was like, man, I really want to go into manufacturing. It was like, God, I got to go into, I got to, take this bullet and go do this. But it was something that I went and took the tour of the shop. And after that, I was looking forward to having that be where I was going to be for 40 to 50 hours a week.
All right. So we talked generationally about differences in the way people research and consume content and experience their buying journey and marketing. We've also talked about differences in how people create relationships. Are there other generational differences that you think get in the way of companies' successful marketing and sales activities?
I honestly think that the 2 biggest things that get in the way, even the biggest thing is just pride, because they've done things for so long and it's worked for so long that the idea that someone would come in and tell them how to do what they've done for 20 to 30 years is just completely out of left field. There's no way I could come into a shop that someone has been running for 35 years and tell them that you're wrong about how things are going.
On the other hand, on the other side, there's also this impatience or intolerance of people that do have wisdom. And so I think you've made the point to me before that you need humility on both sides.
Yeah. So, I want to, as a young marketer, I want to know who your customers are. And, a lot of these, the older generation, they say, well, I don't have time. I have this, and this. It's like, I want to come in and I want to be able to learn from you, but you have to be able to take the time to teach me. And it's like, so whereas you don't feel like you have to say you have time to learn what I'm giving at you, when I'm, I'm giving you as a marketer, I give you the sales tools to put yourself in front of a customer. I want to learn about that customer more. I want to pick your brain about what it took to gain that customer, so that I can kind of narrow down where the trust started. I just kind of figure out a different way, because that person might not be in their position forever, and there might will it now that their sons or their sons or their sons or daughters. I want to know how best to establish and maintain that trust with them. What is it you did? How do I learn from you on how to build that relationship and build that trust, and then take that knowledge and put it into a vehicle that resonates with somebody else that might be a little younger than
All right.
them.
So So let's skip you ahead 20 or 30 years in your career in a number of positions, and now you're on a board of directors. And so now you're telling the CEO, offering some guidance on how you think they ought to be thinking about their market. In that role on the board, but if you had your contemporary mindset as a young person joining the board to provide an additional perspective, what would you be telling the senior executives they need to be thinking about differently? It sounds like what you're saying is understand your buyers better. Is that fair, or are there other things?
Yeah. I think, like I keep going back to pride. A lot of this is, if I'm sitting on a board of directors and they're looking at me on how to strategize, I'm going to tell them to listen. Don't just talk. You need to listen. This needs to be, this cannot be a one-sided conversation where one person thinks they know what's going on and the rest of us just follow suit. You need to be able to listen to the people that are feeding you the information and kind of being and understanding that you don't know everything. So like if I'm a leader of a team, I don't need to know everything, but I need my team to be able to give me information. And then I also need for myself to have an open mindset to listen and really take in what they're giving me. And not just kind of leaning on, well, I know best and I'll kind of determine for myself whether or not you've done a good job. No, I hired you to do a job. They've put me on the board to do a job. And I'm telling them, instead of thinking that you know what's going on, you need to be able to listen to hear what's happening in the field, to hear what's happening at ground level. Because sometimes it gets so easy at 30,000 feet to think that everybody understands what's at 30,000 feet. No, we need to get down to ground level and feel like and think about what's going on down here.
One of my favorite examples that I've seen happen a number of times is the argument about putting a chatbot on the website, and the industrial company, manufacturing company president, I don't use those. We're not doing it. And I say, okay, just humor me. Let's try it. Let's put it up there and see what happens. And 2 weeks later, here comes the global director of engineering for a multinational company through the chatbot, engaging with the sales team directly, setting up a meeting and beginning a project. And they look at me and they say, wow, that really does work. I say, yeah, it does. You have to stop projecting the way you want to consume information and do business with the way rising generations want to.
It's so easy to become siloed into thinking that everybody operates the same way that you operate. I've, in my marketing life, I've been, involved with a number of different projects, and it's very easy to get siloed into, when you're getting given direction, you need to make this like this because this is the way I understand it. And I'm not marketing, but you need to also have, as a marketer, you also need to have the bravery and the voice to go back to them and say, well, I'm not marketing to you. I'm marketing to them. I'm not going to design a message tailored for you for them. You're not them. Why would I market to you?
Amen.
There's this belief is, in a lot of businesses, I just need to get it across that supervisor gate. I'm going to design something that just gets it by this guy because it makes my life easier. And it does make your life easier. Like I can tell you, it's like if I'm doing a project and it gets it across just that supervisory gate, my hands are, I look at it. My dad always kind of told me it's like Mr. Potato Head. If the guy at the top wants you to put the nose on top of the head, put the nose on top of the head. It's not on you. I understand that gets me off the hook, but ultimately, it's going to lead to a conversation. It's like, well, this didn't work. Why didn't you tell me this wasn't going to work? So it might be uncomfortable to have to go back to that supervisor, that person who told you to do it this way, and tell them that you're wrong, or maybe we need to pivot. Maybe we should look at things this way. But because it's going to lead to a conversation that will be positive in the future, because that's what the right thing is.
It's so easy now to A/B test, though. I mean, it feels to me like that's a reasonable way to go about doing it, isn't it?
Yeah. It is just, like I said, it's something that I battle with constantly, is just making sure that the person at the top understands that I'm not designing things for like the 5 people that, might agree with this way of thinking. I'm designing it for the whole. I'm trying to do the most good for the most amount of people. And at the end of the day, I also have to say that it's not that the people that you're considering when you want me to do things an old school way won't get it. It's that they're sometimes averse, but honestly, I've done a number of projects where I've gone down a new wave of thinking, kind of I say it all the time, print versus digital. A lot of people want something tangibly in their hands. If I go digital, they might be averse at first, but if you're only offering it via digital, they'll figure it out. They'll adopt. They'll adopt it. It's not that my dad is completely technologically illiterate. He's technologically averse. It's annoying to him, but if it is something that he has to learn, he will learn.
Yeah, then they'll have to find something else to put on the tables in the lobbies of these companies where they've got the 1970 version of the magazine, right?
Yeah.
You mentioned earlier a great example of what I would call success content. Many companies think of their marketing and sales in terms of securing new customers, but retaining them and growing them is really important too, and building that ongoing trust. You use that example of putting in parameters and downloading recommendations for how to set the machine up and then reaching out to a salesperson to come in and help you. It feels, in my experience, like most companies don't do a good job creating that success content. They just kind of assume that once it's a customer, then they're going to stay that way. I gather you think that's a miss. You think that there's value in emphasizing creating more success content?
Yeah, and this goes back to my, if it ain't broke kind of example. I think a lot of old school companies kind of, they establish a relationship and just that's where it stopped. Like once they've committed to you, that there's always going to be this level of loyalty. And I don't necessarily think that that's always going to be the case. If I'm a company, I have to be looking for ways to cut costs. I have to be able to looking at ways to reduce cycle time or reduce this or reduce that. And if you're no longer going to be proactive in trying to make sure that I stay and just kind of lean on the fact that you're going to stay because you're going to stay and because we've established that trust. There needs to be work on both ends. There needs to be a level of what am I doing? Because if you're not working forward, you're standing still. There are a number of companies that are working forward. And as a customer, I have to look for new ways to bring in new business. And if you're not going to offer that to me and just want me to go here based on the fact that I've been here, I have to reevaluate things.
One of the important functions of NTMA is workforce development and training. And we've talked about this a couple times in a couple different contexts. But let's talk about the role of marketing and of content in finding and retaining top talent, not organizationally for NTMA, kind of approaching the market and offering background to the market on why machining and trades are a good career, but more for your members, the member firms, the machine shops themselves that say, we're small, that's not our job. Have you seen good examples of small local neighborhood companies that use content to help them in workforce issues?
Yeah. So, I mean, off the top of my head, I probably can't name too many, but there are a lot of examples of good companies that are, so you mentioned that they're small and they don't have room for a whole giant workforce. Well, that leads to finding the right people. Because a competent person, a good person can run 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 machines at once, thus reducing your workforce, making your life a bit more efficient. And we do have a number of companies that do take advantage of some of the new technologies on how to bring in new people, how to bring in the right people. An example is one of the processes that that I've taken on is so you go out and say you own a machine shop, you go out to lunch with your partner or whoever, and you come across somebody in their element, whether that be a waitress or whether that be whoever you come across, if they kind of demonstrate that they're the kind of person that is proactive. They're kind of the person that goes the extra mile. They do this, but they're not necessarily involved in manufacturing. They've never been involved in manufacturing. In fact, they probably don't even know where to begin. One of the programs that we're introducing is companies to sign up. They would get a business card with a QR code on the back. if a Salesforce member or whoever else in that company were to be out and about, they find somebody, an individual who isn't necessarily involved with manufacturing, but really that kind of lends itself to, it's like, you're kind of the person that I've been looking for. Here, do me a favor, take my card, scan the QR code in the back, follow the instructions, and it's a prospecting tool. It's not leaning on, not that they're bad, the like programs like Indeed and LinkedIn to find people to come in and do the work, but it's allowing your executives and your sales and your whoever else working for your company to kind of prospect and find people that might not be who they are, who you're looking for now, but can be in the future because they have personality traits that really lend itself to who you're looking for.
That's an interesting.
So there are ways to go about finding the right people. So an example would be, there's a company out of Boston called Boston Centerless, who's kind of really taken the reins as far as this program goes, and are really looking to build not only like a bigger workforce, but the right workforce. So they're taking advantage of this program that we're running, and I can't be more excited for what the future holds.
That's interesting. Switching gears a little bit, you're say halfway through your career. What decisions have you made along the way that you worried were a mistake, but now in retrospect were great decisions?
So there have been times where I felt I think so. When a lot of people get into a certain career, it feels like that industry silos them into only working for that industry. And I think for me, working for a manufacturer, there were a lot of times in my early marketing life that I felt like, because a lot of marketing for an industrial company, they're not as involved, they're not as AI centered, they're not as high level, cloud speaking. It's very much like rudimentary. Like manufacturing takes a lot of print advertising, which is a dwindling industry, but is a very easily learned skill on how to, put things in print and put things in flyers, and so for me to feel like, I'm not really getting involved with this high level, marketing speak and all these new technologies. Well, that's not necessarily the case, because a lot of these companies want a more, feet on the ground type of approach. They're still trying to gain access and insights into the customer. They're using tools up here, but at the end of the day, they're still looking to build those trusting relationships. And that's something that I have in spades. It's something that I've been fortunate enough to learn at the feet of some masters in sales and masters of their craft. So when you break down, when I'm able to break down what it takes to gain a new relationship and build up that trust, the skills can come later. So I feel like, in the early part of my career, I thought, I don't know if this was a mistake going into manufacturing, because I'm not necessarily, learning all I need to learn at this level, at the skills I need to have at this level. Really, the problem would begin is if I didn't understand the relationship and the trust. The skills can come later. If you look at me and I go into an interview and you love me as a candidate, the skills can come later. I can teach you the skills. That's something that is not ever going to be not on the table. But it's going to be a bigger learning curve if I don't understand the basics of what I'm selling.
So coming back to this, relationships built on trust.
Yeah.
You're in an industry where, by definition, a lot of people have to be on the shop floor in order to make things happen, in order to make things. But you work in a discipline that's often work from home. How do you see the conflict between work from home versus back to the office playing out?
So it's interesting. In manufacturing, there's this... There's a very old school way of thinking. It's like you need to be in the office all the time because, and I'll use an example. So with Kyocera SGS during COVID, we had to make the conscious choice to have everybody work remote because we couldn't be in the office. Well, that forced a pivot from management to understand that we can still maintain doing things remote, even though we want to be in the office. One of the reasons why we want everyone in the office is because they're writing policies for everyone, and that involves people that are on the floor. So my policy can't be different from the person who is mandated to run a CNC machine. Excuse me. And they can't do that remotely. So they're not going to write they want, and I understand they want me to abide by the same rules and put myself on the same level as the person who's on the floor. And I can very much appreciate that. But I do think that there's a point coming where a lot of companies are adopting a hybrid where, there's the ability to work from home. I want to in the office, but in case something happens at home, I need to be able to be here. I can still do what I need to get done. It doesn't need to be the school of thought that if I'm not in my desk working from 8 to 5, then I'm not working. No, it's more task driven than hours driven. I'm still getting done the amount of work from 8 to 5. It's just that I might work from 9 to 4, or I might work on a project until lunch, and be able to pivot and do this for a little while, and then everything I have on my plate is getting accomplished. It's just not me physically being in the office from 8 to 5.
So kind of back to this theme that's pervaded a lot of what we've talked about. It sounds like flexibility in thinking as opposed to a very rigid and traditional approach.
Yeah. So flexibility instead of rigidity, I think, is the way things are moving. It's something that I think when people my age, when they talk about work-life balance, they want to be able to have the flexibility to work from home a day or two in case, the gas man happens to be coming between the hours of 12 and 5, or I have to be home because my son is home from school sick today, but I don't want to lose a day's worth of work, or I don't want to lose a day's worth of pay. So having the flexibility, or having a company that will offer the flexibility to do that, like you said, when it comes to workforce development, it does foster an environment of like I said, flexibility. If you come in, you're able to I've heard people use the term, the inmates who run in the asylum. It's like, well, I don't want to abide by everything that these guys are asking, because it's like, well, I need to have eyes on the ground. I need to make sure that you are doing things. But I also think that it establishes trust that I am going to get it done, even though you don't have eyes on me all the time.
Let's talk trade associations. Obviously, an important role of NTMA is advocacy. I know you're not on that part of the organization, but obviously people join for networking and learning and research and data. What assumptions do you think people have about industrial trade associations that may limit the value that they receive from their membership?
So I think a lot of people view trade associations in the same respect that, I don't like using this analogy, but they look at it as almost like a cross between joining a warehouse club and a country club. It's like, I'm joining just to be able to rub elbows with this person and this person and this person. There's a lot of intrinsic value that isn't necessarily what you think of when you think of a trade association. I think everybody looks at it and says, well, I'm going to have a chance to network with this person or this person or this person. But you mentioned advocacy. We have an advocacy arm that regularly goes down to Washington and talks to representatives and congressmen about what's being done to affect the manufacturing lives of a lot of different people that we are members, that they're members of. They want to know, they want to have a finger on the pulse in Washington and know what's coming down the pipe. They want to know if there's any sort of tax exemptions. They want to know what's going to be happening with tariffs. They want to know what's going to be happening with raw materials. They want to have a better idea of what is coming down the pipe that could affect their shops. So I think that there's this belief that, if I join if I join a trade association, it's just, I just want to be able to, rub elbows with those at the top, and I don't need to pay to do that. I just think that there's a lot of missed opportunities when you view that in such a narrow scope. So it's up to the
marketing of the trade association to do a better job explaining that, right?
Yes. And so it's up to us to kind of offer up more of those things that get missed when you kind of look at what a trade association can offer. But it needs to be more of a leap of faith sometimes by a lot of these shop owners that that you can endure a membership for a year and then maybe take a look beyond the obvious and take a look at what we have and what I've actually put out there, and not just look baseline. Oh, I get to go to a couple events and I get to, network with this person.
There's going to be active engagement too. You can't just sit back and expect the value of the association to wash over you. You have to go out and create the value for yourself.
Yeah, that's something that we're actively trying to implore to our membership, that your membership doesn't begin and end when you send that check in. Members of NTMA get access to all the members of NTMA, but that shouldn't be where the relationship ends. You need to be able to put your best foot forward and come to events. You need to be able to put your best foot forward and, actively participate in discussion groups. You need to be able to take advantage of any of the cohorts that we have to not only make so we have a leadership cohort. We have, we call it the emerging leaders cohort. We have we have a sales cohorts. We have HR cohorts. So your responsibility as a member doesn't just lie at, I give you a check every month and you give me access to these customers. It needs to be, I'm taking advantage of this leadership training, or I'm taking advantage of these HR training sessions, or these webinars, or different things that we offer, and take advantage of some of the things that might not be what you think about when you look at things through a sales scope.
You're seeing AI play out in a variety of different ways. You mentioned how you talked about AI at one of these intergenerational sales and marketing brainstorming sessions, but obviously in the machining world, there's some new best practices and some tools built around AI. Obviously in marketing and content, there's a lot of discussion of Gen AI. Are there contrasts between the way people are thinking about those, or are there insights you can offer to help companies understand how to incorporate it in different ways in their business?
So, when it comes to AI, it's very divisive. It's a very polarizing
topic. What is it these days?
The school of thought that wants to make it is. Yeah, amongst other things. It is something that I think you have the people that view it as, I don't need help with these things. I don't need no chat bot or no, AI program is going to understand to my level, because I've been in the industry for 30 years. There's no way that, I can put in a prompt on ChatGPT and it's going to give me exactly what I would translate to someone who's coming in to work for me. And that may be true. Absolutely. But there needs to be a give and take. So when I use something like a ChatGPT, I put in a very generic prompt. I need a letter to if I'm struggling with something. It might spark an idea. So you're not necessarily using it, leaning entirely on it. I'm leaning on it a little bit to kind of spark something to maybe lead to a conversation later, to kind of go down that path of, I needed it to kind of give me a kick in the butt so that I understand where to start. And then I can add all my, my little industry terms or things that are just specific to me. So I think it's understanding that there's this belief that an AI is coming in to replace you. I don't know that is what's happening. I think AI is coming in to kind of give you best foot forward. And then you do the rest. It's not doing it all for you. It's not coming in to take place. It's not coming in to take your job. It's not coming in to do everything for you and just kind of make you obsolete. It's coming in to give you a good foot forward. It's a tool to use, essentially, at the end of the day. It needs to be looked at as such.
I know that most of your spare time is spent being a dad. So you got work, you're a dad and a husband. Does that leave you any time for any hobbies? You still play football, flag football, or anything like that?
No. So yeah, majority of my time is spent being a dad. And I'll just squash. I don't think that there's ever going to be a title that I hold in my life that'll be as cool or as rewarding as being a dad. I absolutely am embracing that. I tell dad jokes like they're, candy. But I do play golf.
Do you play well?
Quite a bit.
Do you play well?
Golf. So golf is something that I'm terrible at it. Shouldn't say terrible. I'm about average. But I love to play golf. I love to spend time with my wife and our family. I do occasionally, even though I'm getting up there in age, I try to take advantage of any of my friends that are kind of actively participating in any sort of sports. We have a group of friends of ours that we play basketball once a week. So my knees hate me, but the rest of me can really kind of be rewarded. But no, I'm a pretty low key guy. I am very much the suburban house dad in my spare time, but Superman at night. No, it's I try to get involved with the schools still now. A lot of the kids that I used to coach are now graduating from college, which is absolutely bananas. But yeah, I would, like you guys spoke on, it's like I started in middle school football. I would love to eventually get back into that because I think anyone who's been involved with coaching at any sort of level, there's an itch that you get. There's this need to be that person, and it's hard to scratch if you're not doing it. So it is something that maybe down the road I'll get back into, but yeah, that's something that I'm very passionate about.
And how about your content consumption habits? How do you consume content to learn more about marketing?
So that's something that I take as a daily task. A lot of people, they look at like, well, I'm just on social media, I'm wasting my time. I'm not really on social media wasting my time. I'm looking at what my competitors are doing. I'm looking at what people are saying in the industry. I'm taking advantage of any webinars that I can. As a marketer, I look at myself as a dry sponge. I'm trying to take in as much as I possibly can. Now that leads to a conversation that I'm not going to be employing all the technologies and all these new processes that I bring in. It's about bringing in the right ones. Just because it's new technology doesn't mean it needs to be employed. You need to be able to ask yourself, is this something I would use on a daily basis? Is this something that I think my customers are going to use on a daily basis? So it's not just about consuming everything and just spitting everything back out. I need to consume as much as I can to be able to find what's right for my role and my team.
So for an industrial manufacturing exec, say kind of the boomer, the G2 boomer that's got G3 stepping in to potentially take over, what podcasts or newsletter or YouTube channels would you recommend to them to just help them absorb more of this mindset about marketing and sales?
So I would try to take advantage of, there's an individual for Factor that does a podcast at Paul Van Meter. He does a wonderful job. Tony Gunn for MTDCNC is a great person to kind of follow and take advantage of their as a podcast. I would honestly say it can get intimidating when you look at the world of podcasts and how deep that rabbit hole goes. I would say if you set aside, my best advice, and I've given this to numerous people, if you set aside half hour to an hour a day, just go on LinkedIn and just scroll. If you find something that you think interests you, click on it. Go down that rabbit hole. Don't look at it as wasted time. You're doing market research, but go down that rabbit hole and find out what people that your peers even. Find out what your peers are looking at. Find out where they're going. It's not a waste of time that, people look at it from very old school. If I spend an hour looking on LinkedIn, it's an hour spent not on the floor. I understand that school of thought, but at the end of the day, if you're going to move forward, you need to know what's going on. And the best way for me to kind of relay the finger on the pulse is to just go on LinkedIn and find out what's out there. Scroll. Even if it's like a fruitless rabbit hole that you go down, at least you can say that you were trying to go down something and find something that would better your life. And better
maybe just set a timer so you know how much time it's been, because those rabbit holes can get deep.
They can. And, it's like getting lost in YouTube. This leads to this, this leads to this, this leads to this. But I have to make it, because it can be very time consuming on my end. I have to make it a point to go on LinkedIn every single day. Just scroll, just as a consumer, and trying to consume as much as I can, that might translate positively to the people that I'm trying to send a message to.
You've got IMTS, which is a massive industry trade show for your world coming up to September.
Indeed.
Then you've got your NTMA Engage event coming up October in Nashville. What do you think about physical in-person events? And how do you approach an event like one of those with specific content-related initiatives in mind?
Yeah, so IMTS is a monster in and of itself. When I look at the IMTS world and I want to know about what's going on, that's kind of that's how I view IMTS. I'm as a show walker, not as an exhibitor, or even as an exhibitor. I want to go to IMTS to find out where everybody else is relative to myself. You know, am I miles behind? Am I miles ahead? You know, like, what is it? As a marketer, I go around, I find out, what pieces of technology are people taking advantage of? Where is it that I need to maybe, bridge that gap? Where is it that I need to kind of make up ground? And I'm going to, but at the very basis, I'm going to network with the people that are in my industry and kind of pick their brain as to where they're moving. What led you to this? What's going down your mind when you guys employed this piece of technology or brought on this tool or engineered this and this and this? But when it comes to Engage, it's a very narrower focus because obviously it's going to be a lot smaller of an audience. But it's more of a helpful tool when it comes to, there are a number of speakers that we have coming in that offer individualized advice to each member company. You'll have the chance to pick their brain individually. So it's like having access to all the higher level people, all the 30,000 feet people on the ground level. When you're on IMTS, it is very easy to get lost in the shuffle, literally and figuratively. But at an event like Engage, it puts those people that are at 30,000 feet.
Got it. When you go to an NTMA, are you going with a camera and a couple of microphones? Do you envision running interviews there, or are you just having conversations?
So we have discussed the possibility of kind of interviewing people while we're at the conference. And actually, one of the things that we've been doing is, so I mentioned Tony Gunn. Tony Gunn is an absolute wonder in the space and has been at a number of our different conferences and does have, a backdrop, a mic, and brings in people that he wants to find out more, kind of like what we're doing, find out more about their story so that, it offers up insights to that person on how to tell their own story. So that's a big thing is that, we're kind of hitting on about this Engage is telling your story, being able to take the wealth of knowledge that you've acquired over decades and being able to properly tell that story. So that's something that I have done in personal conversations, but we all are actively trying to push more of the narrative. It's like putting a microphone, putting the camera on somebody, even though they might be a little averse, even though they might be a little shy, and letting them kind of tell their story and giving them a voice and letting them kind of be themselves. Stories.
I think stories, conversations, trust, these are weaving throughout everything that we're talking about. So as we head to wrap up, a couple questions. Number one, how do folks connect with you? And number two, how about NTMA? If folks are intrigued, is it only for machine shops, or are there other people that ought to think about membership in NTMA, and how do companies learn more about that?
So our general membership lends itself to small to medium-sized manufacturers. The way I look at it, it's like there's tiers of offering. You have your basis of your small to medium-sized shop that comes into as a member that want to learn more about the industry, that want to take advantage of some discount programs. And then we have a number of organizations that come in as national associate members that can offer programs to our customers that wouldn't be available otherwise. So we just recently entered into a partnership with Production Tool Supply, based out of Novi in Michigan, and they offer a number of, they're a tool distributor. They offer a number of discount programs. Companies can who are under that umbrella. QSR SGS is a part of that umbrella. They're a supplier for PTS. Our members can come in and take advantage of discount programs on tools.
So it's primarily for machine shops.
We have companies that come in that offer helps with HR. We have companies that come in that have, that can offer help with marketing. So there are a number of different companies. As long as it's a value to the basis manufacturing member, we will entertain it as a member.
So it could be outside of a machine shop.
Yeah, as long as they can demonstrate value to our members, it's something that we'll take a look
and
at.
Connecting with you, what's best, LinkedIn or what?
Yeah, so you guys can all find me on LinkedIn. That's the social media that I take most advantage of. That's the one that I'm on most regularly. So people can find me there.
And I'll link to your profile in the show notes.
Yeah, absolutely. And if you guys have any questions, I'd be happy to talk with you about them. I'm an open book. I wear everything on my sleeve. If you guys have anything you want to know about me or about my process, or just kind of want to confide in me about similar situations that you might be in, I'm always open to the conversation.
So I think that's a great place to wrap up. This has been great. And I'm sure as you talk about confiding in you about situations, so I'm sure we've managed to irritate everyone across generations and with our generalizations, but hopefully it's also provided a lot of food for thought. And so wrap us up, if you would, with some final thoughts on industrial misconceptions about marketing and how marketing needs to change as buyer habits and expectations change.
So we keep hammering these words. So listening, having the humility to listen to another point of view, and maybe not adopt everything, but maybe take from it what you need to take from it. It might, as uncomfortable as it may be, as anxiety ridden as it may lead to, it's something that it's imperative that we do as marketers, is make sure that we're not leaning on the status quo, that we're not just going about, if it ain't broke, it just needs to be an evolving situation. If you're not moving forward, you're standing still. If you fall behind, you get left behind. It needs to be something that is constantly learned, constantly absorbed. And then if you choose to take advantage of it, you choose to take advantage of it. If you don't, you don't. But as long as you know what's out there to be taken advantage of, you're moving forward.
Fabulous. Thank you. Thank you so much for your time, Dan. Thanks for your insights. Thanks for your patience and willingness to chat.
And I really appreciate it. Thanks for having me.
For everyone listening, please make sure you hit the bell. It takes courage for folks like Dan to kind of speak about some of these uncomfortable truths. And so give this episode a like in recognition of his willingness to do so, and make sure that you leave comments if you're interested in digging further into these topics, and share it with your colleagues, both intergenerationally and interdepartmental, where you think there's going to be some value. Thanks for listening today.